Hi, Jodi Daniels here. I'm the founder and CEO of Red Clover Advisors, a certified women's privacy consultancy. I'm a privacy consultant and a certified informational privacy professional, and I help provide practical privacy advice to overwhelmed companies.
Hi, Justin Daniels here. I am passionate about helping companies solve complex cyber and privacy challenges during the life cycle of their business. I do that through identifying the problem and coming up with practical, implementable solutions. I'm a cybersecurity subject matter expert and business attorney.
And this episode is brought to you by Red Clover Advisors. We help companies to comply with data privacy laws and establish customer trust so that they can grow and nurture integrity. We work with companies in a variety of fields, including technology, SaaS, e commerce, media agencies, professional services, and financial services. In short, we use data privacy to transform the way companies do business. Together, we're creating where there is greater trust between companies and consumers. So to learn more, visit redcloveradvisors.com. Alex, we are so excited that you are here with us today. So welcome, Alex.
Thank you, guys. Good to be with you.
Absolutely. So Justin, who do we have with us today?
Well, Alex Rayter is a husband, father, volunteer, and operator of Phoenix 2.0, a full-service IT and cybersecurity consulting and management firm. Alex is passionate about local not-for-profit organizations and how technology and the power of data can solve societal problems which heretofore felt unapproachable. He also believes that the internet access and data security and privacy are fundamental rights of our modern society and is committed to helping his clients and those in his network to leverage technology to better their businesses and personal lives.
So Alex, welcome to the show.
Thank you, guys. It's really good to be with you.
Absolutely.
I'm looking forward to having some fun.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about how did you find your way to cyber? How did you start your company? Tell us a little bit about the story of how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, I mean, in kind of in a nutshell, so I'd been in IT since a little bit prior to the dot-com boom. So we're talking kind of late 90s. And I worked in corporate IT, corporate employee-facing IT and back office infrastructure. And just sort of through the dot-com crash and, the sort of Bay Area job market in tech that fluctuates, I sort of figured out that I like working for smaller consulting firms and sort of being able to write my own ticket in the kinds of solutions I recommend to clients and overseeing the implementation from concept to design to post implementation support and doing a lot of customer handholding and just really having creativity with tech and not sort of being pigeonholed into a rigid sort of a corporate structure around that. So started a small consulting practice that really quickly grew. I have a couple of partners that I'm fortunate to work with, and we've always been a boutique, but we kind of I would say punch above our weight just because of they're a little bit older than I am and have a lot more market experience. So I've been fortunate to work with clients that I think I wouldn't normally have exposure to working in a small managed services provider. But yeah, and then I would say a few years prior to 2017, security started to become a little bit more of a public thing, right? It wasn't like something that IT people talked about amongst themselves and, worried about. I mean, being in IT, we've always talked to clients about recovery time objective and recovery point objectives in terms of architecting a backup structure for their data, right? And so part of the conversation has always been what kinds of things can blow those metrics out of the water, right? Well, cyber events have always been a thing, right? It's just that I think around 2017 when we had ransomware start to happen and we had NotPetya and WannaCry and Equifax, right? And then GDPR comes out. I think that put the subject front and center. And so while we've been working on it for many years, we really have stepped it up. And I would say in the last 5 years, just because of it's become such a public thing. So, and now it's really a major preoccupation for us and our clients, I would say, or prospective clients that we talk to.
So, Alex, I think where I want to begin our conversation is, interestingly enough, we prepped for this program with you in early December. And since we prepped for that, we have SolarWinds. And I think I refer to December as the ransomware Grinch that stole Christmas. And so with those things in mind, I'd love to get your take on how those things may impact the companies who seemingly continue to ignore cyber and privacy issues in their company?
Yeah, I mean, so our clientele is SMB, lower middle market, and then groups within enterprises, right? So it really depends which one of those you're talking to. I think the SolarWinds thing is a major concern for larger enterprises or people that are big enough to run SolarWinds or any of the tools around that ecosystem. But what I think some of the wisdom out there is saying, and some of the folks, we all know, think is going to be the case, is that the folks that have established sort of persistence in these environments are going to hand this stuff off to ransomware gangs, right? And that I think will flow downstream to the smaller organizations who are already so much on the back foot. So I'm concerned about an even more massive ransomware year, right? Affecting, schools, municipalities, not-for-profits, right? Small privately held entities. And that I think, I don't know what we're going to do about the SolarWinds thing sort of as a larger picture. I mean, I think that's a much bigger topic to cover, but I'm concerned more about our clients who were already on the back foot.
So Alex, just to drill down on that a little bit from your perspective is, when I think about SolarWinds and some of these other things, what immediately comes to my mind from a SMB or even enterprise level is your supply chain is a significant cyber risk and potentially a common point of failure. And I still find myself really having to educate a lot of companies to say, well, what kind of third-party compliance plan? How are you vetting your vendors? Because you may have a great cyber plan, but if you've given your HVAC vendor the keys to your kingdom, all your security is for naught. So talk to me a little bit about what you're seeing with your clients when you talk to them about, hey, you really need to care about this, your vendor ecosystem risk level.
Absolutely. So what I have seen an increase in, and which I find hopeful, is that a lot of our clients or prospective clients we're talking to, we meet them because somebody handed them a security questionnaire and said, fill this out if you want to continue working with us, which I think is a positive development. And so we get brought in to do some sort of a gap assessment or readiness assessment against one of the frameworks, right? And I normally, during the course of that conversation, I will normally interject, you should talk to not just us, hybrid IT security firm, you should have counsel on standby that you can call in the event, in the case of an event, right? You should talk to a privacy consultant, because let's start having the privacy conversation while we're looking at security, right? Let's not put that off. And have a team approach to this thing. So that's one of the positive developments I see. And that I think, so they understand supply chain from that perspective, because they're being asked. Some of our more mature clients are in turn asking clients in their support, vendors in their supply chain, to fill out questionnaires. So it's this whole, sort of everybody's passing around their papers and saying, hey, what's your posture like, right? So which is a new positive development.
So for the smaller companies that you're working with, and we've talked about SolarWinds and what's happened recently, but we've now been at this mostly permanent-ish remote workforce situation for 10 months now. What are you seeing are some of the big issues arise from those types of environments, right? People are now kind of settled into this remote work environment. So what are you seeing from a privacy and a security perspective of what they're doing right and maybe what they're not also doing right?
So for me, it's a question of sort of pace and scale, right? Like I said, I think, smaller organizations were already on the back foot, right, with security, just trying to catch up and get, handle some of the CIS top 20 controls, right? Roll something out that resembles a programmatic cybersecurity approach. Now, what we've done since March of 2020 is we've just multiplied the attack surface several times fold, right? I mean, exponentially. Home offices with no sort of de facto security built into them. People that were using work devices, now there's people and employees that have gone home and are using, home devices for work at least part of the time, right? So you've got BYOD, two of the sort of the worst things that could possibly happen to an environment. So no network perimeter and BYOD, right? And oftentimes no requisite policies to deal with, those kinds of situations, right? So what happens if you're using a personal device and it's compromised and we need to wipe it and you've got, family photos on there? That's not a conversation you want to have with an employee in the middle of a cyber event, right? So Some of our more mature clients have done things like put an addendum to their employee agreement that's a work from home addendum that talks about acceptable use policies in the home, right? And a lot of it is data privacy. How do people feel about this sort of bleeding over of, personal and work data onto the same device, right? If I'm in my home and I'm talking to a customer, right, and folks can see everything around me, I may have tabs open on a personal computer that people can see. I mean, all of these sorts of things that were heretofore not really a concern. So, yeah.
So, Alex, kind of bringing the conversation out at a strategic level is talk to us a little bit when you have to go into these potential customers of yours to talk to the executives, the CEO. How do you communicate cyber to them on a level that they can say, yeah, this is something actionable. I need to put money and resources towards this. How does that conversation go these days for you?
It goes better. And again, I think since, I think 2017 has gotten people to pay attention. CCPA coming online has definitely gotten lower middle market companies and some SMBs thinking, okay, privacy, security, I need to be looking at this. Where I find that I'm successful is when I talk to them about the overall risk landscape. So we have an IT business, but we also have an IT management, but we also have an IT staffing practice or technology staffing practice. And so I talk to employers about the difficulty of hiring and retaining tech talent in the Bay Area, right, in California, with all of the employment law sort of burdens and salaries and just finding the talent, right? So I talk to them about that. We talk about supply chain, product supply chain, or materials from Asia, right? A lot of companies here rely on that, right? So a lot of SaaS companies have a device that's where part of the supply chain, the manufacturing is in Asia. So what's happened since COVID, right? With that, talking to them about financial headwinds, right? So, and then I slide in cybersecurity, right, as part of that conversation. So when I talk to them about the general risk landscape, and cyber is just one of the top 5 things that you now, Mr. Business Owner or Mrs. Business Owner, should be paying attention to, it's a much easier conversation than if I just come in and start spewing cyber all over the place without contextualizing as part of the larger sort of risk landscape that any good business operator has to concern themselves with. And frankly, the conversation is such, look, you could be sitting here and have a 6-figure, 7-figure event tomorrow, depending on the size of your organization, and be at 20 to 50% operating capacity for a month. How is that based on your risk appetite? Is that something we should be concerning ourselves with, right? And I think that kind of conversation gets people to pay attention a little bit versus sort of diving in with controls and all of this kind of all of the compliance frameworks and stuff, which I think people lead with sometimes, and it sort of falls on deaf ears because they don't know what most business owners don't get cyber that way. So.
Yeah. So on that theme, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges today that your customers are seeing from this privacy and security perspective?
Well, especially on the privacy side, I feel like they understand that they need their workflows, need to change, that they need to be able to do some things pretty quickly now. If somebody calls up and says, hey, I want to see what you have on me. And furthermore, I want to be forgotten, right? And so I think a lot of them don't know where to begin. And what I appreciate, Jodi, about your services is that you have these sort of prepackaged plans that I think are very easy to consume and get people started on a program in a sort of it's a practice and a program, right? You're not going to arrive at GDPR or CCPA compliance overnight. And I think a lot of business owners out there, they don't know where to begin. And so, telling them, look, you can talk to a privacy consultant, just have a consult first, right? Do a data classification project, right? This is something that is automated. You don't need to sort of, marshal your whole workforce to do this. And then let's have a review. Let's have a conversation with cyber, with legal, with HR about, what this would look like if you were to begin this journey. But you've got to start somewhere. And I think that people find that helpful versus, okay, I'm in scope for CCPA. What do I do here on fire kind of thing, right? So.
Yeah, no, very important. I talked to someone yesterday. It was really interesting to hear how the needs arose of how to comply and who's on task. It actually started from HR and thinking from an employee perspective. And then they kind of task someone else who doesn't know anything about privacy and security to go out and find vendors who can help. So
Yeah.
it's really interesting because the decision to decide, which vendor and how to start and where to start, you really need people who understand the situation and the data and how the organization's kind of set up for them to make the right choice of which people do they need to bring in. So it's I think it's even a learning curve of who in the organization needs to be a part of the team, if you will, to help solve these privacy and security challenges.
Well, on the privacy theme, because we just had this conversation before. So in the context of, hey, Jodi, does your company collect any privacy information?
No, we really don't. We don't really market. We get all referrals. We don't do anything like that.
Yeah, but you have that CRM, and don't you have emails and phone numbers of people?
Oh, well, we do.
Well, that's PII. Didn't you know that?
No.
Oh, well, maybe we need to have a conversation with those Red Clover people. So, Alex, with our fun banter in mind, our question for you is, how often do you see companies who claim they do not collect personal information only to find it in places the company did not expect to find any, like maybe Jodi's phone or an employee phone or something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all the time, right? I mean, I can give you the IT perspective on this. So we often meet companies that, would like to form a support relationship with us, right? And, the reality is most, even middle market companies don't have adequate IT documentation for somebody to come in an emergency and pick up support of the environment. So if they don't have basic documentation about infrastructure, I mean, how can we expect them to know where data is flowing through that infrastructure, right? I mean, it's sort of like, that's the scale of the problem. So yeah, I think people are really, really sort of in the dark about, first of all, nobody really has a purview that's organization wide, right? So it depends who we're talking to, right? If we're talking to marketing typically knows that they have PII, right? Because they use this stuff in campaigns, right? So, and sort of customer nurturing and journey mapping and all this sort of stuff. But you talk to another department and they're kind of like, they don't really have a sense of what goes on overall. So, and the reality is it's hard for us to get enough stakeholders together to really have a conversation that's meaningful about, we're going to look at the overall environment and how data flows and sort of how you guys actually work. I mean, it's a problem of documentation, from my perspective. So.
You mentioned documentation and sort of the IT document, so someone could come in and pick it up. What should that documentation look like? If you were to come into an organization, what is it that you're asking for and want them to produce? Or if they don't have them, what are the types of things that you could help create?
Yeah, great question, Jodi. So I realize I didn't really do a great job of contextualizing the last answer, but one thing I would say is a network diagram, right? Like a basic network diagram, what's connected to what, right? In terms of infrastructure, where are the servers? How's data coming in? What protections are there, right? Where are people remoting in and from where? IP addresses, login credentials, right? What's running on what? So and that's typically, it's a half a page Visio diagram, that you can fit a lot of stuff into. Sometimes you got to zoom out because there's so many little pieces there. But I mean, they often don't have that, right? So if we're going to drill down to the data level, we certainly can't expect them to have any kind of meaningful answer. And again, I think we typically do upwards of 20 to 30 interviews in an organization to really get a snapshot of IT and data and all this sort of stuff. And that's an IT audit. And then we take that and we propose, cybersecurity, IT management, planning for near to midterm budgets, et cetera. So that's the scope of the exercise to really get our hands around this. And I know that there's some great tools out in the vendor landscape for doing this from a privacy perspective, right? Which I think is amazing, because otherwise, this is a manual effort on our part. So or has been heretofore. We also have tools, but I think the privacy tools that are out there seem very mature. So.
Well, thanks for elaborating. I think that's really helpful for people to understand the types of documents that we want to be having.
See, I find what Alex said very interesting, because Alex, what you just said is one of the first 3 questions you're going to ask on an M&A deal when you're looking at due diligence of the IT and the cyber infrastructure, because if you don't ask the question that Alex put forward, you won't even know what ports you could have that might be open, which are the exact way that people get in to have a ransomware attack. And as we all know, the typical amount of time between coming into a network and engaging in the mayhem is around 277 days. So I find it interesting that what Alex is saying is not only relevant for your initial trying to help companies with their hygiene, but also if you engage Alex because you're going to use his firm on M&A cyber due diligence.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've been on both sides of the deal table. So somebody's going to acquire somebody, they want to understand what they're acquiring. Conversely, hey, we're being acquired or we're being shopped around, people are coming in, or auditors are coming in. We have to, documentation, we have to show them something, show us our papers, right? As Mike Hamilton from CI Security likes to say, I really love that phrase, show us your papers. It has kind of a negative connotation, but it's, that's the reality of it. And so, yeah, I think doing that kind of exercise is, important. It's really got to be in place, whether it's M&A or whether you're going to get a questionnaire from one of your largest clients. You've got to be able to turn this stuff around pretty quickly. You don't want to be doing this kind of discovery, right? And in a crunch. So I agree, Justin.
I'm curious of either the M&A side or just even in general, as we were talking about kind of that vendor management piece. Have you seen it change in terms of volume or the types of questions over the last couple of years? Are the questions getting a little bit more granular or more of them, or has it been the same?
I think they are getting, well, these are different, right? Like what I find mysterious is the questionnaires that cyber insurance companies send around. It's fascinating that some of them have a very basic questionnaire and others, some of the better companies, I think, it's prudent to have a much more detailed questionnaire, but that's a whole separate conversation. That landscape is evolving quickly. These security posture questionnaires are typically, I think they get pulled out of like, SOC reports or other compliance frameworks. And then, the company will then sort of take what they think is relevant and give it to people in their supply chain, right? So when I look at these, we'll bring in a CPA firm and who has people that do cyber compliance and auditing. And typically, what happens is for most companies, if they're mature enough, have enough infrastructure, they're better off going for a SOC, right? And so we'll tell people, listen, don't fill this thing out and fill out another one tomorrow and a different one tomorrow. Just go for, high trust or SOC certification or something like that. Start that journey. You do the readiness assessment. You can answer the questionnaire and show them that and say, hey, I'm working towards a SOC. But most of them will say, look, you can show us if you have some kind of a credentialed thing, you can show us that. So, yeah, I feel like it's evolving, right? I mean, I think it's good that we're making each other fill those out. So,
thank you.
So, Alex, changing tact a little bit, we ask all of our guests the following question: is, can you share with us what you think your best personal cyber tip would be?
Well, I think it starts with passwords. I think if you can't really get around that and start going into, advanced cybersecurity, I tell people start with passwords, right? If you can wrap your mind around that concept and how to do that, just the exercise of that will get people to then realize, okay, I'm doing passwords. I should do MFA. I should think about identity and access and privacy. It's my data, right? It's the whole concept of I'm securing it with a password. So I think that for me, that's the number one control, right? I think the biggest issue you can have is if somebody nabs your credentials to email, right? I mean, if they get into your email, they'll start resetting things, locking you out, sending emails on your behalf. So I would say passwords, and then from there, the Australian Cyber Directorate, which is an agency they have there, came up with this great thing called the Essential 8. So I've got an Essential 10, I tell people. I added a couple things, but it's like a subset of the CIS Top 20, kind of scaled down to the personal level. And I would tell people, look, passwords, and then turn on multi-factor, and make sure you have a backup of your data somewhere that's not connected to your main device that you're working on. So
all super great tips. Thank you. So when you are not consulting and advising on cybersecurity, what do you like to do for fun?
I can best answer that question by asking you, what do you mean by fun? I don't know if that tells you anything, but I'm kidding. Work's really busy, and I'm lucky that I enjoy what I do. I mean, I geek out on this stuff, but I'm really into history, and it's a sort of like a passion interest of mine, and I do, what I would say is purely fun, that it has no sort of motive attached to it or anything else. There's no sort of value add for work, is hanging out with my 4.5-year-old. So I have 2 older stepchildren that I didn't have when they were little. So my 4.5-year-old is kind of like, I get to do all the things. I get to relive my childhood, go fishing, go bowling, play sports. And that's, I think for me, that's the purest sort of type of fun that I have these days. And the rest of it is, dealing with 2020 and the inherent sort of challenges of that, and then work. I really do enjoy what I do for work. So and volunteer work is there's a social component to that. I think you guys some of the things I'm involved in. I think you guys have a connection to some of those things, and yeah, it sort of checks both boxes. I get to volunteer and I get to hang out with fun, interesting people while doing it. So
I see future history book clubs in the future between the two of you.
There could be.
There's a history buff sitting right over here too. Well, Alex, thank you so much for sharing your wealth of knowledge here today. If people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
Well, check out our website. Our contact info is on there. Our URL is p20inc.com or p20inc.com. Or email me at alex@p20inc.com. Look me up on LinkedIn. I'm very active, and so is Justin. I enjoy participating in his conversations. So, yeah, feel free to reach out. I'm very giving with my time. I'm happy to talk to people about this stuff, just sort of off the cuff, and no engagement needed. I'm genuinely interested in helping people with cybersecurity and bringing you guys in to help on the privacy front. Really important.
Well, wonderful. Well, thank you so much again, Alex, and we appreciate your time.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you guys. This is fun. Appreciate the opportunity.